you have a good problem to have. But, you know, having said that, journalists are busier than ever. There are more sources of information now than ever. There's Wikipedia, there's Google, there's YouTube, there's Facebook. You know, with all these sources of media, and obviously we'll talk about that with new media, you know, they're being bombarded with information. And yet they have fewer resources and less time to follow leads and to cover stories. So as we all know in communications, there's a lot less investigative journalism. You see a lot fewer reporters going to City Hall and going to look up information, right? And their job is not to help you. I think we talked about that earlier. They don't sit around and think, you know, that's a really good organization. I wonder what I could write today so that, you know, so I could help them. But what are some good benefits from actually getting into the news? Anyone? Exposure. And what does exposure get you? Attention, money. Somebody said money. Message. And it helps with branding. It helps with, you know, all the other things we've talked about, but particularly funding. And a lot of you rely on donations and funders. What about legislative policy? Right? And, you know, I remember thinking when everybody was going to Congress the other day, I met with a couple members of Congress, just people who I know, and they don't know what you do. And, you know, I talked about what we were doing here and kind of, you know, what the strategy was and what the priorities were, and they just didn't know. You know, I talked about microlending, and somebody said, well, that's like Kiva, right? And I said, well, yeah. And they said, do we have those in our country? And, you know, obviously we do. So we have some work to do. But, you know, news media is a way to reach your members of Congress, your state legislatures, your city government, and really move policy and change policy. I apologize here. I don't know where we are here. I'm going to skip a little forward because I know we don't have much time. But what I do want to get to is, you know, there are some really easy ways for you to get into the media. You know, I don't want to discount what some of us do, charge people money to do. But really, it's not hard. Journalists need you just in the same way that we need them. You know, journalists right now are trying to not only educate the public, but really educate themselves about what's happening with the economic crisis, right? And so, you know, I guarantee you, if anybody goes home today, picks up their local newspaper, how many stories do you think relate to something that you do or something that your clients are working on, right? Right, with the economic crisis, with mortgages, and uniquely in every section of the paper. It's not just the business section. You know, obviously the front pages, but what about the home section? You know, you're seeing new building services, new, you know, weather protection, and different things that people are doing to save money as a result of an economic crisis. So look at the news. What are people writing and who's writing it? Identifying who are the reporters who are covering these issues. They're trying to learn just like everybody else is about what's happening. And call and introduce yourself. Pick up the phone, and, you know, every single news outlet now you can see who wrote the story, and obviously when Peter's on TV you can see him, but, you know, how do you get a hold of them? Everybody has email addresses available to them as well. So call them and pick up the phone and say, you know, this is Holly Armstrong, here's what I do. I'm dealing with people who are dealing with what you were talking about today. And I just want to make sure that I can be a resource for you. I'm drinking water. I'm probably breaking every public speaking rule too. It's like my sister sitting here. My much younger sister. But you can really provide value to reporters as well. I mean, you are a very good resource, you know, not only to help you get your message out, but think of yourself as a resource. You have those facts, you have those statistics, you have real stories to tell reporters to help them reach their audience and tell people what's going on. And be prepared to talk to reporters. You know, it's really easy to pick up the phone, you have a lot of information, but it's just like being prepared to be a public speaker. Have your facts in order. What do you want to tell this reporter? What do you want to deliver? What's your message? And, you know, in helping reinforce your brand, what are your overall organizational goals? Yes, you can call and help reinforce, give them some statistics, but is there anything overall that you're trying to relay that you want to be sure and say? I write it down. And, you know, I don't know about the rest of you who have, you know, are dealing with reporters as well, but a lot of times I'll have a little list in front of me just like I would have a list when I'm speaking anywhere about kind of what you want to say. Here are the 3 things I want to get across. It shouldn't be 20 things. It should be just a couple of things that you're really trying to get across. And reporters, obviously, like I said, are very busy, and they'll appreciate that you are not taking a lot of their time trying to tell every story in your arsenal. And be clear and concise. That's self-explanatory. And get to know reporters. There was some advice on a website I found that said, one great way to get to know reporters is look at their blog and look at their stories and comment at the end of the story and comment online. There is no substitute for personal relationships. You know that in your line of work, every line of work is the same way. There is no substitute for calling somebody saying, here's what I do, who I am, and I want to be helpful to you. And so get to know those folks and who's covering those stories and see them as colleagues. We're all trying to understand this economic crisis. You're on the front lines, and you have a unique perspective to be able to help that reporter. And check in regularly with those folks. You haven't seen a story for a while? It could be that they're working on something bigger. There could be, in a couple weeks, a big Sunday front page story about the economic crisis. Call them up and say, hey, here's what we've got going on. Just want to check in and see, what you're working on. And again, serving as a resource. And make sure that reporters and editors and others are on your distribution list. Whether it's an e-newsletter, obviously for any press releases and specific news-targeted things, but anything else you have going on. Do you do news alerts? Do you do legislative alerts? Keep them in your list. Make sure they know what you're doing. And maintain your contact list. Journalism, as we all know, there are papers going under, there are reporters who have become TV reporters, or TV reporters going to PR firms, or people moving around. So just maintain your contact list, and again, use it as an opportunity to keep checking in regularly. And watch for changes in the industry. Tragically, there are newspapers shutting down, but also just keep an eye out for those changes and who is where. And again, I can't say this enough, reporters need you too. And Peter knows this, but you're a resource, and so make sure you see yourself as that. And this is not an adversarial relationship, but this is really becoming part of the dialogue. And to be part of the dialogue, you need to form those relationships. And again, get everybody involved. I can't remember who mentioned this earlier, but this is, keep everybody's eyes and ears open. Some people have 2 people in an organization. There are some of you who have 10 or 15 or more. Everybody should be involved in this process. Everybody should be watching for that. Pardon me. And so make sure that it's not just you, or it's not just your communications director. This is not one person's job. And so I guess, I want to leave some time for questions, but what I would leave you with is, one assignment, which is go home, look at your newspaper, look for that story where, it's about a mortgage crisis or economic crisis or something that deals with your agency, and pick up the phone and call that reporter. This is who I am, this is what I do, this is what my organization does. We're on the front lines. I want to make sure that you know how to get in touch with me. Everybody get that? Great. I see nods.
Time for a quick question? Nadine.
Hi there. One of my concerns always is that reporters want to speak to our clients, and they always want a real live person. And sometimes that's very helpful for us. We want to get our clients out there. Other times I feel like the clients are being used, and I don't want to expose them just because a reporter wants to put a face on it. So how do you deal with that?
Well, a couple of things. One, know that perspective of the reporter. What are they looking for? And you may get a call that says, here's what I need, and I want to talk to this client. But gauging a little bit better about what is it you're trying to do, what story are you trying to tell, and then that's your opportunity to say, who might be a better person for you to talk to. And again, it's a relationship with those folks and figuring out what really they're getting at. And some clients aren't very comfortable talking. And this goes back to my bigger point about, I always say, choose your best spokesperson, and many times it's not you. And so looking at who is the best person to address that. I always use the example of when I worked for a governor, every year we had to release a budget. And so every year reporters would want to talk to somebody or have some question and follow up on that. And I, not as much anymore, but have always looked really young. And so imagine, getting there, but imagine, me talking on TV about a $5 billion budget. And then, change that with, I could be saying the exact same thing, but Larry talking about a $5 billion budget. Who's more credible on that and who kind of looks the part? So that's, sorry. You look smarter.
Is that
comes around.
it depends on whether that's
I understand the world.
Right. But it's the same way, that's visually, but it's the same way kind of on record. Does it come better coming, does it sound better coming from a client or, what I call validators, which is a word I may have made up, but, because it always gets a red squiggly line in Word, but it's somebody who can really speak to what you're doing. And sometimes clients are the best people to do that. Sometimes it's a board member who is also, works at a bank or, whoever it is, but find who that best spokesperson is and work with that reporter to really get at what are you looking for and what story are you trying to tell and how can I best help you do that. And, this might not be the right person. Mm-hmm.
Wait.
Thank you. So, what happens once you're successful?
Mm-hmm.
We, for example, got this great radio program, 2 5-minute slots. Now, I saw this great T-shirt that said "Spin needs never saying you're sorry," and I want to know, how do we create that spin with what we have? Because sometimes it'll be an article or this radio program. It's like, we think for 5 minutes we're really famous, and then how do we get more leverage out of that?
Well, new media can speak to this, as well. But, really this is about not just one hit or one story, but it's about being part of the dialogue. So, once you have some coverage or once you have something like that, use it, send it out, use it to raise money. Fundraising isn't my expertise, but, once people know who you are, it becomes easier to raise money, it becomes easier to move public policy. When I was meeting with when I had lunch the other day with a member of Congress who I used to work for and was telling him about what we're doing, and I said, imagine if somebody came in here and said, we'd like you to support this legislation, and when we leave here, we're going to go home and we're going to talk to a couple of reporters who we have a relationship with. We have a radio show, every week, it's 5 minutes, and we're going to talk about whether or not you support it. Would love to have you would love to be able to talk about your support for this. Which is, and the person I was talking to said, well, you shouldn't threaten anyone. And, well, actually, but once, you use it to your advantage, and you can use, 5 minutes of radio or one mention in a newspaper story and send it around. And media coverage is, begets media coverage. Once you become part of that dialogue, you have more opportunities to be in that dialogue. Thank you.